Okay, hello, good evening everybody, and a very warm welcome to tonight's webinar, which is in celebration of our new short documentary Beavers Without Borders, which was screened on Sunday night online on YouTube. My name is Sophie Pavelle and I work in the comms team for Beaver Trust, and I was also involved in the film Beavers Without Borders, and it's a real honour to be chairing tonight's discussion, and I'm really excited to introduce this amazing panel to you tonight. Now, before that, I'd like to really thank the wonderful Chelsea Green Publishing for hosting with us tonight and for their continued support in our work. And for those of you who aren't aware, Chelsea Green is an employee-owned American publishing house which specialises in non-fiction books on progressive politics and sustainable living. Chelsea Green sees publishing as a tool for effecting cultural change, and their purpose is to reverse the destruction of the natural world by challenging the beliefs and practices that are enabling this destruction, and by providing inspirational and practical alternatives that promote sustainable living. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have them hosting with us tonight. Now, you may recognise Chelsea Green because they published the fabulous Bringing Back the Beaver by Derek Gow, who's in our panel this evening, which was published just a couple of months ago. This is, if you haven't read it already, it's an amazing book that tells the story of the beaver, and it's written in a very powerful way, and it couldn't be more timely. So please look out for this book, giant beaver on the front, and also support your local indie bookshops as well during this time. And there we go. So please do shout about your attendance tonight on social media, tag Beaver Trust, tag Chelsea Green, and use the hashtag Beavers Without Borders if you can. That hashtag was trending for a brief time on Sunday night, so maybe we can get it doing that again. So now we wanted Beavers Without Borders to spark discussion and to inspire a hope that nature and people can one day live a bit better together, and it's definitely sparked a lot of discussion, which is why we're really thrilled to be hosting this evening for you to get stuck into that as soon as we can. So please make sure that you make use of the question box at the bottom of your screen and engage with us in the chat, and we will endeavour to ensure that as many of these are answered during the evening as possible. We have until about 7:30 on the Zoom, but we'll just see how it goes, and I have no doubt that we'll have lots of conversation. Quick bit of etiquette for the panel. If you are not speaking, please could you be on mute, and please try and refrain from talking over each other, just so that we can all hear what everyone's saying. Now, I'm going to stop talking and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm just going to go around where you are on my screen, and if you could give a quick bit about who you are and what you do, that would be great. So, Gerhard, your turn first, please. No pressure.
Okay, now it works. Well, you can see my name, Gerhard Schwab. I'm working in Bavaria. I got a master's from Colorado State and started with beavers working in '88. And the last 25 years, I'm working as beaver manager in Southern Bavaria. So if somebody got a problem with beaver, had questions about beavers, he can come and I go out, look at them if they want to have a field trip or whatsoever. My colleague in Northern Bavaria and our 500 volunteers, they go out and help the people if there's anything pro or contra beaver questions.
Perfect, thank you. Nina?
Hello, I'm Nina Constable and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I am the writer, director, editor of Beavers Without Borders.
Lovely, thank you. Duncan, please.
Hello, my name is Duncan Pepper. I'm an ecologist and fishing guide. That's all there is to say. I've been interested in the beaver situation since it started in Scotland, since their arrival really in Scotland.
Great, thank you. And Chris Jones, please. You're on mute, Chris. There you go. Try again.
Okay, I'm Chris Jones. I'm a farmer from Cornwall and a director of Beaver Trust.
Short and sweet, thank you. And last but not least, Derek and Roisin, please.
Roisin, would you like to speak first?
I'll do the technical.
Yeah, so I'm Roisin Campbell Palmer. I guess I'm a beaver ecologist. I've been working with beavers for over 12 years, involved in the first official reintroductions of beavers to Britain, day-to-day beaver management, beaver ecology, and I guess beaver health and translocation is my main day-to-day.
Thank you. And Derek.
I'm Derek Gow. I'm the author of the book Bringing Back the Beaver, which is the entertaining tale of how this, we brought the species back to Britain. That's the official rather than the unofficial version. I met Gerhard in a pub in Bialowice longer ago than I think either of us ever cared to mention, and he agreed to supply us with beavers. So if you're wondering where the beavers have come from, his fingerprints are all over them, and some of hers are over them as well, but none of mine you'll find. So I've had quite a bit to do with beavers over the course of the last quarter century. And in case you're wondering, Chris Jones is wearing makeup. He's been watching too many episodes of It Ain't Half Hot Mum. And if you remember that wee character called Lofty that wore that silly hat, then that's him. He's just taken his hat off and left it on the table.
Good, excellent. Right, well, thank you, everybody. We're gonna dive straight in, really. We've got a lot to cover and a lot of people who want to know lots of things about beavers. So we are going to go right in the deep end, if that's okay. And we're going to talk about fish, and we're going to talk about rivers, and obviously talk about beavers. Now, we know that over many hundreds of years and fairly recently, our rivers have changed and have become canalised and have been modified to accommodate a busier, more peopled world, if that's a thing. So, Duncan, there is a question that came in that I think you would be a good person to start with. And the question is, it came from YouTube, and it says, what are the effects of beaver dams on fish passage in our modern and managed river systems? Let's kick off with that one.
Good question. I think it's important to recognise there is a potential negative effect of beaver dams on migratory fish passage. As Roisin has often said, we need to take people's concerns seriously. And there is a possibility that beaver dams can get in the way. So historically, and prior to excessive human interference with rivers, rivers were multi-channel systems. They were braided systems. As you were saying, lots of rivers now are incised, meaning they're cut into banks. They are effectively put in a corset. So they're not able to expand in the way they would have previously. And previously, where a beaver built a dam, there was room either side of the dam for new channels to form, through which salmon or any migratory fish would be able to pass. Nowadays, with our land use, we have many rivers, we're not allowing them the room to do what they would like to do, which is expand all over the place. However, this doesn't mean that all beaver dams will block passage to fish, certainly not. In fact, the vast majority of the evidence suggests that even in the absence of braided channels going around the dam, beaver, salmon or any migratory fish are able to negotiate that dam. So that might mean jumping over it. If you look at the research by Michael Pollock, he reckons that the vast majority of fish are able to get through the dam because they're leaky structures. There's also a lot of people have said, when I've said that, Michael Pollock's research has largely been done in the US, and some people think that the differences between the Canadian beaver strain and the European beaver strain are such that we're talking about very different things, and also the Pacific salmon compared to Atlantic salmon have different habits and things that they can deal with. So this has been somewhat addressed by a guy called Duncan Halley in Norway, who's done some electrofishing upstream of multiple beaver dams and found there migratory fish. the juveniles thereof. Now, either the adults swam through the dam, which is the most likely thing, or the juveniles negotiated the dam on their own. Either way, they're making use of that habitat, which is the key here. We're talking about recruitment in rivers. How many fish, how many juvenile fish can a river produce in order to have more adults come back? And maximizing the potential habitat is the real key. Now, the presence of beaver means you've got much more potential habitat. Without beaver, you have less. Much of our fiddling with rivers has turned them into straight incised channels, as we said, much like you might think of them as a fire hose, you know, but that water just shoots down and the water is mostly at the same depth. There's not a lot of variety there. Lack of variety means lack of different habitat types, habitat mosaics, some people describe that as. And what you really want is maximum diversity of habitat types. So if channels are going in different directions, then they've got a different orientation to the sun. Some might be warmer or cooler at certain times of year, more shade, less shade. You've got different speeds of flow and different depths. All of those things mean that more creatures, more invertebrates and more fish can live in a river with a lot of habitat. So the take-home message is we need to, I'm sure Gerhard's going to talk about this, but we need to allow room on our side of our rivers for them to do what they want to do and for beaver to do the best they can.
So it seems like it's almost a question of how we manage the rivers versus trying to manage and have control over the actual ecology of beavers and fish, which has been in place for millennia. It's more we need to scrutinize how we're managing the river itself and perhaps adapt it so that we have the space so that beavers can create their wetlands, but to, you know, that actually caters for the full salmonid life cycle, for example, but not to the detriment of the surrounding land. Gerhard, I wondered if you wanted to follow on from that. There was a lady called Sue in the comments has said that Switzerland also has canalized many rivers some years ago, but I have seen many beavers there. How are beavers managed in Switzerland that perhaps differs to how they're proposed to be managed here, or what can we learn perhaps from Europe to implement over here?
Well, that's one of the problems people have with beavers. Beaver don't care very much what we think. If you have a canalized creek in a cornfield and you do nothing for 20 years, you're going to have a great habitat because the beavers will create it. And beavers have been living together with all the other species 50 million years. We were still in Africa, jumping on the tree from one branch to another, didn't even think about going down on the ground, and all the species lived together. There was no fisherman, no farmer, nobody blaming the beaver being against other species. The problem is really to have space along the creek where the beaver can organize the creek, where he can work, where other species can come, where he's working for flooding protection, for keeping water in dry seasons. Of course, if you look at Switzerland, it's a very, well, in theory, Switzerland is the biggest country in Europe. If you flatten it out, the problem is it's very high, but not very flat. And most of the beavers are in the western part, in the center, which is heavily used by farming. But the beavers, they have the water and they have food, and that's all they need. They might cause problems by digging a burrow, by feeding on arable land, but the beavers can live there. The beavers do not need wild nature. Beavers need water and food. They're very, let's say, primitive animals. Give them water, and if they have food, they're going to stay there. And well, of course, in Switzerland, they have other problems with beavers flooding areas, digging burrows. They have as we have in Germany, in Bavaria, beaver manager, Christoph Angst. And the different cantons in Switzerland, they're differently organized. So in some areas, beaver is game species, in others not game species. So we have game wardens or beaver consultants helping the people go out, lower a beaver dam, build a drainage pipe in a beaver dam, buy area as set aside, or what they also do is build artificial beaver burrows. So the beaver can live in the artificial burrow and does not dig burrows in the area. Beavers only need a rather small stretch along the creek. 10, 15 meters to the right and to the left, and then the beaver is happy and you don't have any problems anymore. And if I look, for example, back home to Bavaria, here in Bavaria, I could make a 15-meter strip to every single one of our 7,000 beaver territories without taking a square millimeter of land from somebody. It's all land in public land bought by taxpayers, just illegally used by farmers. If you look at the map, you see the map, a huge cornfield, and all of a sudden, if you look at the map, oh, there's an old path, an old way going through the cornfield. It was just destroyed and plowed under. So if we go away a little bit from the creeks, give the land to the creek, to the nature can work, beaver can work, both can live, many species can come, and there's still more than enough left for farming and other uses. We don't have to plow next to the creek.
Thank you, Gerhard. Does anyone have any points that they'd like to follow on from there? You're on mute, Duncan.
Yes, I'd like to add just a little bit to say about salmon and beaver. That even in the event of a salmon being unable to pass a beaver dam, as Gerhard mentioned, there are things we can do. There are mitigations that we can take. We could cut a notch into the dam. We could put a flow device in, or in an extreme event, we could remove the whole dam. That might seem like a lot of work and a lot of monitoring, but if you compare, if we want to take climate change seriously, then the amount of work required to get wetlands and get enough woody structure in rivers and all that sort of stuff, it's not feasible to do that with manpower. Beaver are really the only option if we want to take that seriously, if we want to be prepared. So yeah, if we compare those two amounts of work of removing the odd dam or putting in a flow device compared to the huge volume of work that it would be to prepare ourselves or prepare our rivers properly for what's inevitably coming our way with climate change, then yeah, I see beavers actually as the only realistic option there.
Right, so Roisin's controlling the mute button here, so I can't speak unless she presses it, which is a really juvenile way to behave.
Censorship.
But at the end of it all, Gerhard's right. This is not about a fish and a dam. It's about life. We're in the middle of an extinction crisis. 95% of the vertebrate biomass of this world is us and our domestic animals. All other life is ebbing away like you simply wouldn't believe. The lights are going out left, right, and centre. At the end of it all, these animals quite simply restore life. I've spent a lot of time in continental Europe, commonly with Gerhard. Gerhard will remember that video we looked at not that long ago with the Greeks, where they're showing us this footage of the Rhodhopi Mountains. And there are wildcats sitting in a swamp surrounded by frogs, washing their faces. Where the water is, there is life. Where there is life, there is food. Where there is food, there is other life. So when we look at this whole debate about fish, you know, with all due respect, guys, it's utter nonsense. If we're looking at one fish and we're saying, look, it's about one fish, even though there's absolutely no scientific evidence to suppose there's a scintillance of an issue at all, what do we do about the other things? Do we just cut the water voles adrift and the ducks and the grebes and the plants and the newts and the toads and say, you have no future? And then furthermore, when we look at the ability of this species, we've just been looking at some video footage that Alan, who's sitting over there eating his tea, has taken of our farm. And right, come on, these are the geeky experts from Exeter University. How much water do you think has been held in that complex on our farm and on Tina's?
And millions of litres.
Millions of litres, okay? Millions of litres not going down to hit the wee village of St Giles every bloody time it rains. So it's not about a fisherman standing in his waders, chuffed to bits with his gilly standing on the bank holding a big fish so he can take a photograph and make his mum happy. It's about those people at the bottom. We're all in this together. Why are we delivering this misery constantly as far as these poor folk are concerned, just because one day, you know, we want to catch a fish? This is a nonsense, a very big nonsense. It's just another excuse for doing nothing. That's all I have to say.
Will I mute him now?
How does that work?
That was very good. Thank you. Okay, we're going to carry on with the theme of creating space for beavers to do their thing and generally giving rivers more space to breathe. Chris, I'm going to come to you with a question from Pete Etheridge on the chat. And Pete says, we have had many beavers within enclosures trials, the Cornwall Beaver Project and Laddock, of course, being one of those. How do we persuade adjacent landowners that Beavers Without Borders, to coin a phrase, is an important, if not vital, next step to take? How do we make beavers actually have no borders and all the things that go with that?
At this stage, on a case-by-case basis, because we still do not have the regulatory framework just to cut the bloody fences, which is what we really need. I think there are a number of things that we could do, but the most critical one for farming and farmers would be is if we have a mandatory buffer against all our waterways, 20 meters. Gerhard once said if we had a 20-meter buffer, that would take out 90% of the agricultural conflict. Then let's do it. We should pay for it. Why not? We've got the ELMS system coming in place of the CAP. Just pay for it. You could pay for it well, and it would be money well spent. The other thing, of course, is once you've got those in place, those are also going to help keep the rivers clean anyway. It's going to hold up water on the edge. It'll let vegetation reestablish. It will become the basis of our nature recovery networks. So I think that's how, as at present, by persuasion on a case-by-case basis, but if we can get our agricultural support right, then there should be no problem.
But to go back to a point that was made after the film screening on Sunday, that was expressing frustration that this whole process is taking such a long time, because it's very clear and the science points to the fact that beavers are important, they have their benefits. Yes, they can be difficult animals to manage, but the benefits massively outweigh the costs. But this person rightly expressed frustration that why isn't this already a thing? Why is it taking so long? I mean, if we look at Bavaria, they've managed to make it work. It's taken a lot of work from Gerhard and other individuals, but why is this conversation still happening when we know the science?
Because we have institutions which are not capable of dealing with the circumstance of the 21st century. Our institutions are basically a 20th century at best, and they are not fit for a time of climate change and extinction. We are facing essentially a war situation. We need someone like bloody Churchill in number 10 who was going to say, go and bash down the door of the Environment Agency and say, right, get on with it. That's what we need, and we haven't got it.
So it's almost a mindset. It's almost a mindset problem, Derek.
It's a political problem. In the end, it's a political problem. You know, we elect our politicians; they should do what we need, and still, so far, they're fanning around, and we actually need them to take control now, because it's all, you know, the science is in and done. We know these animals are a pain in the arse sometimes, and they can be controlled. It's not hard to shoot one or trap one. We did it very successfully a few hundred years ago. Let's now get the law changed and get the bloody things out there.
I mean, Roisin, it would be interesting to hear from you, because obviously you work, you know, right on the front line with mitigation techniques and working with people and the different stakeholders, and a really important part of your job is managing these expectations and dealing with a lot of the social conflicts that arise. What are your thoughts about why, you know, is it taking a long time, or actually do we just have a weird perception of how fast these things should come into place?
Yeah, no, I think people are getting frustrated at the situation and feel it is taking a long time. But I always say, if we look back a few years ago, this, you know, beavers going into even enclosures in England, that wasn't even on the cards. So actually things have moved on very drastically, really, in a few years. And I know Derek's sitting beside me itching to disagree, but I'm going to say, look at where we were. So in 2009, that was the first official license application in the whole of Britain to put beavers out. So yes, that's 10 years on, but we've already now got so many more beavers back in Britain than we've ever had. So I think there is a cause for celebration, but also, okay, we can be frustrated that the systems are slow, but I mean, we have to be realistic. Often, you know, we can get very excited about putting beavers out, and what I felt along the line, this is a personal opinion, there's a lot of gloss and kind of excitement about releasing beavers and putting them out into wider landscapes, and we can all do that. But actually, if we step back in a few years down the line, it's usually the landowners that have to bear the costs and the problems with beavers. Now, that and a lot of times can be minuscule and it can be minor. But I think we can't move away from the fact that some small farm, especially in agriculture, are fronting the costs of beavers back on their land. And yes, as a wider society, we can say beavers will bring benefits. You know, on the whole, this will be positive. And yeah, we can say that, you know, there could be, you know, economically wise, beavers could be best for our landscapes. But when you're that one farmer that only has a few fields that are butted up against the river, and the beavers do come in or punch a hole in your flood bank and your crops go out for that season, you know, I think we can't say that, okay, well, tough luck, you farmed in the wrong place and you have to deal with it. But if there's a system that, you know, allows people to, I'm not going to say compensated, but allows people to, you know, be assisted in that mitigation process, I think we have to take that seriously. And we can't just point the finger, you know, often at the farming community and say, well, you're bad and it's all your fault because you won't tolerate beavers. So, you know, I think it's a give and take situation, and there are mitigation tools. And I think we shouldn't lose how brilliant this species is with the complexities and the challenges that the restoration brings as well.
Can I just say something? She has made several very fair points, and I'm hoping that when this all finishes, she doesn't punch me too hard, because I've got to go to work tomorrow, okay? And it's going to be embarrassing to go and see the guys I've got to see with two black eyes. But this idea, we're all poor peasant farmers, and at the end of it all, we're going to starve because of beaver. I mean, that
I'm not saying that.
No, you know the project that you looked at the other day where that man told you the loss of his potato crop?
Yeah.
Okay, explain that story, because that's very interesting.
But it's significant to that farmer, is
right.
What I'm saying.
So yes. Basically, when she went to see a burrow that had gone through a dam wall, a dike, an old medieval dike, and the man is saying, well, if we've lost the whole crop of potatoes, it's going to come to £30,000, okay? That's fine. 2 weeks ago, you sit down on Radio 5, you have a medium-sized landowner in Scotland who says, these beavers are costing me £5,000 a year, it's all terrible. You then look at what his subsidy check actually comes to. And bear in mind, you're all paying the subsidies, and the subsidy check is for £146,000 a year, and £40,000 of that is for greening and anti-global warming measures, and yet he can't tolerate a beaver. At the end of it all, this whole system is propped up by subsidies. It's a ridiculous system, and it's a system that's against nature, against the interests of wider society. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So, you know, that's one part of it. And yes, we have to take into account that there's 20% of the farming community, maybe not even as much as that, who actually have water running through their land, may be impacted, but it depends on how you're farming and where you're farming. And where I'm farming in West Devon, we've just been looking at pictures tonight of the beavers holding water right the way through the woodlands at the bottom of our farm. We never could farm these, they're worth bloody nothing, and it's much better that those animals are in there creating life. And believe you me, if you turn around to most of my neighbours and say, we're going to pay you for the beavers to hold dams, they're going to water in the dams, they're going to say, whoopee, because we made nothing from it anyway. It's as simple as that. When it comes to where we are in a wider sense, why this has not happened more rapidly, it's because we, the British, and unfortunately I have to include the Scots, Irish, Welsh, and English, even though it's distasteful in this, are just really good at blagging. We blag big stories. I mean, a week ago, we were sitting with the Slovakians, Gerhard, was the Slovenians, can't remember, Central European Republic, and they're saying, how are we going to learn from you guys about beaver management? And what we all turn around in the end and say is, go and speak to the Germans. They're really good at it. What we have experience of is making a complete bollocks of it. You know, we're good at telling big stories. We're good at puffing ourselves up like toads. But when it comes to us actually doing anything, what we do is we have support at the bottom. So little children sitting in school in theatres in Chelsea look at those of us who go to speak and think, you're going to sort things out. Politicians, you know, from the top down, say we want to do things fast, and in between we've got this bloated nothing that's set there to ensure stasis and stability. I mean, today one of my colleagues told me that a conglomeration of different organisations have actually, and this sounds ridiculous, formed a beaver jumping committee. So they're going to try and figure out how high a beaver can jump. Now, I've got a T-shirt in my drawer at home that shows you how bloody high they can jump. The thing nearly bit me in the guts, and it jumped, I don't know, I'd say about 1.5 feet. So that's how high they can jump. It was very frightening. I have personal experience of this. The next thing that happens is they form a beaver burrowing committee, and wait for the punchline, Roisin, you'll love this. They're looking into it. So it's just, how can we do these things? What you need is people who say, right, I'll tell you what, this is a job to do. You actually need farmers. Farmers are good at this. This is a job, we want this job delivered. There's the timescale, there's the budget, you do it for us. Off you go. What we don't need are a whole lot of people that explore cul-de-sacs and evidence gaps for the whole of their lives until eventually retire to join a golf club. It's just pointless. That's why we are where we are today now.
Okay, thank you. So we are gonna segue slightly. From that. We've had a really good question from Lucy Hodson. I think it sums up this section really well. So as lots of people are agreeing with Chris that this is a political problem, and it's a problem that people who understand ecology perhaps and who work in this area, we get the ecology behind beavers, we get the biodiversity benefits. But Lucy said, how can we communicate the gravity of the biodiversity crisis when your average person in Westminster couldn't tell a sparrowhawk from a linnet? There's this huge communication challenge. And perhaps, Nina, I'd quite like to come to you, because obviously as the producer and you wrote Beavers Without Borders, this was a huge communication project, if anything, and we really wanted the film to spread awareness and to help answer questions that people have had about beavers. So how do you see the power of communication? How do you kind of, when you approach your work, what does that sort of mean to you?
Well, I think for me, I'm not a scientist, and I don't know if I could tell the difference between a linnet and a sparrowhawk, which is embarrassing. And so I think I approach it from somebody that isn't a scientist, and I need to understand it. And so I have to do a huge amount of research, but then in communicating it, I have to make sure that it's understood by other people that aren't necessarily ecologists or scientists as well. And I think a big part of this is making this a mainstream conversation. And so that was what I wanted with the film, was for it to be something that wasn't something that would just bounced around an echo chamber, but went beyond that. And I think, you know, there's 6,000 people that watched the film on Sunday, and, you know, not all of them knew about beavers. And we've had messages since that. There was one that was a teacher who said that he'd scrapped his curriculum for the Monday following and was showing the film to all of his students, and then messaged again that evening saying that, you know, the students had a debate about the pros and cons of beavers, and there were now 30 new beaver believers. And that to me is a big win, that there were 30 students that didn't know about this subject, that now, you know, having weighed up the pros and cons, they're the future generation, and they think that beavers back in our landscape is a really important thing. And so I think engaging that youth voice is really important as well. And I think that was also a part of this film, was putting in the animations as well to kind of try and communicate these, what can be quite complex subjects or controversial ideas, to try and communicate them in a way that sparked conversation but didn't turn people off, I think.
Yeah, totally. And if I can add to that, we've had lots of questions about what Beaver Trust specifically is doing to raise awareness of what's going on and to try and communicate these issues. And a bit like Nina said, we're very much in the kind of pure communication phase at the moment, because as we're learning and as we've sort of spoken about a little bit, there is still a lot of misunderstanding about what a beaver is and what a beaver does, and their role in our landscape and our role with them. And so at Beaver Trust, we're really trying to make the most of the opportunity when lots of people are listening and ready to hear about more about beavers. And you know, Derek's book is the same. It's all part of trying to educate such that the decisions are made correctly and that they're very informed. So stuff that lots of people are asking what they can do. One of the things you can do is just to follow us on social media. We've got lots of resources and interactive stuff coming up. We've got our podcast coming out. The film again is a good resource, and we've got plans to develop that further. And just to, as I said on Sunday with a similar question, we're all here. We all want to talk about beavers. We have plans to do more webinars like this. We want to keep the conversation going. It's so important to have a dialogue like this where people can feel like they can approach the difficult questions or things that are on their mind, because that is the only way that we're going to make progress. So please do get in touch with all of us and just keep asking questions, and hopefully that will be a good way forward. So we are going to continue to move on. The live chat is crazy, but very exciting. So Gerhard, we had a really good question from someone who has asked for a good case study in Germany where beavers have alleviated flooding. So, you know, we're seeing, especially in the UK and Europe, lots of extreme flooding events in winter and all throughout the year. And lots of the evidence points to climate change as increasing these incidences. So have you got a good example of where beavers have actually assisted in these effects?
We have a very good example. Most of the guys who were already in Bavaria, Nina, Chris, Roisin, Derek, they know the guy Jürgen Reuth from Windsor. It's a community on the Danube where they had been, well, on the Danube get flooding almost every year. And they had planned a dam to keep the water back from the rivers running down to the Danube. And the cost for the dam was about 340,000 euro. They started to do the planning and everything, and then the beaver came and started to build dams in the area. And then it turned out they didn't need the dam anymore because the beaver was holding back the water. So they didn't have to spend 400,000 euro for the artificial dam because the beaver dams did the job. And we had a presentation yesterday. Yesterday we had our 24th annual beaver meeting in Bavaria, and Jürgen Reuth was giving a presentation, and he said it's not only the costs of the dam the beaver saved us. The houses in the village, they were not wet the last years because the beaver has kept back the water. And the other big advantage is the beaver is taking care of the maintenance. So you don't have maintenance costs anymore. You don't need a person to do the maintenance, look after the dam where it's working, everything. Let the beaver do the job. He's doing it 365 days a year. Okay, some years 366 days. He's doing it permanently. So it saves not only the dam, it also saves a lot of money maintaining it. And I think Jürgen would be quite happy, and I'm also quite happy if I get the presentation from Jürgen to send it to you. It's in German, but we could translate it. So you see a real world example where the beaver saved a lot of money. He kept the water back. He also helped the people down there. Well, Jürgen was telling the story of the flooding coming, and from the guy upstream, a big pile of firewood was washed down to the neighbors further down, and they collected the firewood for themselves. Of course, advantage of flooding if you get firewood for free, but it's just the best example. You can go in the field, you see what the beaver did, you see the beaver dams, you see the area where the water is, and you can understand why the water stays in the beaver dams. If the dams are a little bit higher than the water level, it has to fill up. And while it's filling up, you get, as Derek mentioned, 100,000 million of liters of water raining down, coming down the hill, but not going down the river to the village, but staying behind the beaver dams. So if you don't spend a single cent and you're safe from flooding water, you're happy. So if somebody wants to visit Jürgen, he's happy to welcome you.
Great, thank you. And perhaps I'll get that presentation. Okay, it's working. I was going to say, perhaps we can get that presentation off and we can circulate that if people are interested. Chris, I'd like to come to you for a question about rivers, as we're on the river theme. Daisy Brassington on the chat has asked, are there any specific requirements of a river in the first place to begin considering if beaver reintroductions are appropriate? And this is very interesting. We've had a lot of questions about urban beavers. Can they live in a semi-urbanized environment? You're on mute.
Okay. Just to do the last bit first, I think there are examples in Bavaria where Gerhard comes from, where beavers are living right in town. We went to see a beaver colony in Munich airport, for example. And I see no reason at all why beavers can't subsist really well in parts of London, for example. And in fact, there are two nascent beaver projects there now. We're speaking to both of them today, actually, about if there's anything that we could do to help them move that along. So that's the first bit. I think that the physical requirements for a beaver are really, really simple. Is there water and is there food? If there is food and water, then beavers will be fine. Where the trouble comes is there food, is there water? Is there something they can, some infrastructure they could damage or adapt in a way that was unhelpful for us? You know, I think the reality is that beaver problems are essentially human problems and what we can tolerate. So I would turn it around and say we should be looking for what things beavers are going to really upset people over before perhaps considering putting beavers in a place. But of course, as time goes by and they become more widespread, and they're living freely, they can go anywhere in a catchment they feel like. So then it comes down to what do we do to actually try and mitigate the problems when they arise. And I think there are lots of methods of doing that. I won't bore you with all of them now, but there are lots and lots of methods of doing that. And again, we looked at Gerhard very large on this because he's been doing it for the last 20 plus years in Bavaria and has reduced the conflict quite magnificently. But I would say, just from the beaver's point of view, life is easy if he's got some fresh water and something to eat. That's all he needs.
We can relate, I'm sure. Gerhard or Chris or anyone who feels like they'd like to answer this one, there was a lot of interest in the statistics that were relayed in Beavers Without Borders about how the beaver dams physically slow the peak flow rate in a measure of time. So it goes from taking, a matter of minutes for the water to go from one place to another, and then with a beaver dam stuck there, it goes from minutes to days. So how does one accurately measure that data such that it can be used to inform the economics and natural capital value that beavers have?
Well, there are a number of studies. Another thing was presented yesterday by Volker Zahner, who's professor at the university in Munich, and it is PhD on beavers. And he was recently doing a study on the influence of beaver dams on flooding. So he measured how big are the beaver dams, how old are the beaver dams, how much water keep they back, and he also got data on how much water is kept back. There's another study from Belgium where they had almost half as many floodings to do beaver dams. It was not all beaver dams, it was only one territory, and this one territory reduced the amount of flooding from every 3 years to every 5 years, 6 years. So if you get more dams, it's still getting less. And they also had figures on how fast the water is running down. So in Windsor, for example, it's from coming down, raining, and being in the village in 45 minutes in an hour to days where the water is kept back and running down slowly. And I don't know whether they got data in Devon in the project. They got data on how much water is raining, how much is coming out, but I don't know whether they got data on how long it takes for the water to leave the area again. I can ask Volker and whether he will give his presentation. They can also send to you and you can spread it. And some of it was in English anyway, and the rest we could translate before we spread it.
Thank you. Yeah, and Chris, you've got a device down at the Cornwall Beaver Project that measures water levels and things like that. Did you want to just explain briefly how that works?
Okay, before we got any beavers there, we got involved with Exeter University, and Richard Brazier and Alan Puttock came and put in, I hope Alan's in the room somewhere with Derek, came and put in a depth gauge and a logger at the entrance to the site and on the exit of the site. To cut a long story short, before the beavers were there, any flood peak entering the site was exceeded by the flood peak leaving the site, and they were almost instantaneous in occurrence, i.e. the water came in and went down 200 meters of riverbed in the twinkling of an eye, maybe 10 or 15 minutes difference, but hardly visible on a graph. 10 weeks after the beavers had arrived there, the beavers had built 3 dams. It rained, and for the first time, the peak leaving was lower, not just lower, much lower. It was about 25% lower than the peak entering, and it was visibly beginning to separate in time. So there were instead of just being one peak visible for both in and out, it was now definitely 2 peaks being seen, and that has continued. And now there are 12 dams there, and there's a hell of a lot of water there. And the separation is now, if Alan's in the room with you, Derek, get him to come on and just tell if he can remember how long, but it's about an hour or so difference between the water entering and the water leaving.
You sit.
Sophie, we've got a guest appearance because Alan is in the room with us because we're all away on work.
Sit there, Alan.
Come,
Alan,
please introduce yourself.
Hi,
Alan Puttock.
I'm Alan Puttock, Exeter University, and I'm measuring flow and water dynamics across a range of beaver sites nationally.
But it's his birthday today, so does anybody here want to guess?
Happy birthday!
Because we just had a bloody good laugh about it. I told everybody he was 12, but he's much, much older than 12.
I think to be such
a anything funny. So if you want to have a bit of a laugh, do it now.
Alan, do you have anything that you would like to add on the discussion about water and flow?
Yeah, so we're measuring flow in and out of beaver sites nationally now on a whole range of studies, and showing that basically beaver dams create barriers and roughness within the landscape, storing large volumes of water, which does slow the flow.
And he's not coping well with it. Really.
Yeah, it's the pressure it's getting to me.
We told him to tell jokes.
To slow the flow of wine, maybe.
Yeah, quite.
That's echo in fairness, Sophie.
No, but all jokes aside, basically we've got results which are shortly to be published, along with results from the River Otter Beaver trial, which show that across a range of sites, basically through different landscapes, the lag time, so the time between rainfall falling on a site and flow leaving the site, is increasing post-beaver reintroduction to those sites. And peak flows, so the highest flows you see during storm events, being reduced following beaver reintroduction, as is the total amount of water leaving the sites. But we're also seeing benefits at the other end of the hydrological extreme as well. So it's with climate change, droughts predicted to increase. Some areas of the country almost essentially semi-arid already. And because of the water storage increase at beaver sites, you're seeing this slow release of water. So not only is that reducing flood risk during wet events, but it's also increasing base flows and increasing water in the rivers during dry periods. So you're seeing this kind of double benefit at the 2 ends of the hydrological extreme.
I'll just add to that, as a farmer, drought frightens me a hell of a sight more than flooding does.
Ask them what else frightens them.
Nina.
That button.
Yeah, I was just going to say something just from a visual point of view as well at Chris's, because I've been filming there from before the beavers were put in, even the fence went up. And it's just incredible to see the transformation on the site, to the point now where it almost looks like they're like water terraces, and you kind of go in and there's just these different layers. And even now, I was there today with Chris, and there's been this really heavy rainfall over the last few weeks. But at the bottom of the site, there isn't a huge amount of water rushing through. It's kind of moving slowly through, because you've got these kind of, the water is moving through, you can see it, but it's a really, really amazing example. And to have seen that transformation over the last 3 years has been, yeah, amazing to watch that transformation. And if anybody can, when we can, I would recommend anybody go to the site to see what the beavers have done there, because it's pretty mind-blowing.
That's a really good point. It's so important, I think, to visually see the impact that beavers can have. And as we've said many times, as Derek so brilliantly put in the film, it's all about changing mindsets, and we need to almost reimagine how we see nature. It's this very dynamic, messy, complicated thing, and we can't keep fitting it into little boxes and sticking labels on it. We've got to be a bit more creative with how we view it. So I think, if you ever have an opportunity to visit a beaver wetland, I think it's an amazing opportunity. Beavers are amazing teachers for helping us understand how nature works and how an ecosystem sort of breathes. So I think it's a brilliant opportunity for helping us to open our eyes. Roisin, there have been, Duncan, please. You're on mute.
Sorry, I just want to say this wee thing. Don't want to take you off topic too much, Sophie, but I'd like to say to all the anglers, just in case I don't get another chance, and in case my son comes back in again, and now I've got a wee hiatus, that there's quite a lot of wrath towards beavers. And it seems to be, the argument is, a reduction in fish numbers. If they could redirect that wrath towards culverts, which are cutting off hundreds of miles of river around the country as is, which those migratory fish cannot pass, might not be able to pass, but cannot pass, that would be massively beneficial. So shift focus from worrying about beaver dams onto culverts, of which there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, that cut off potential habitat for spawning. Okay, sorry.
No, please don't apologise. Does anyone have any? I mean, Gerhard from Bavaria, it'd be interesting to hear kind of, are your rivers similarly canalised to the same point that they are here, where culverts are, concerning?
Well, I didn't see all of the rivers in the UK, but if you look at the rivers in Devon at Chris Place or Derek's Place or in Wales, they are much more natural than ours. So we have destroyed a lot of rivers. So we had a system of small creeks, small rivers running down. It's all put together to one bigger river, and the rest is arable land. The problem with culverts, we got two. We got in Bavaria a couple of thousand man-made dams and culverts to keep the water back for hydroelectric power, for creating fish ponds and whatsoever, and nobody talks about them. They're of course complete 100% barriers to fish. But if you want to talk about it, you have to blame yourself and you have to blame other humans. So you better go to the beaver dam 20 meters further down and blame the beaver that the fish don't come up. We had one discussion about a beaver dam. The fish cannot migrate. They don't have a spawning ground anymore. But if you looked 100 meters further up, above the beaver dam, there was arable land. So you had so much silt on the ground, there was no spawning site anyway. But where you did have a spawning site was right below the beaver dam, because the beaver dam, he keeps all the sediments back, and below the beaver dam, the ground is washed off again, and it's gravel ground again. So trout coming to spawn, she would never go up to arable land where there is a lot of gravel, but she's happy now and finds a spawning site right below the beaver dam, where the water runs over the beaver dam, has higher oxygen, so it's just perfect for small fish, being below a beaver dam. Instead of having a lower but equal layer of sediments all over the creek, you have some spots where the sediments are trapped in the beaver dams, and you have other places where you get new spawning grounds for the fish. And that's another problem. Another system in England, here in Bavaria, where each community has 1 or 2 or 3 or more fishing societies. The problem is, of course, if you own one area and the spawning site is great in the neighbor's fishing area, it's a human problem. You're against the beaver because the damn fish are spawning at the neighbor's area and not at your area, so you don't get the fish anymore. He got the better side now. And of course, the brain of a trout is not too big, but I think that trout is smart enough to move out of the gravel, out of the sediment area into the gravel area and spawn there and live there where the habitat is much better because there's a beaver. But if it's now the fishing area of somebody else, damn it. So a lot of the problems, it's
Pardon the pun.
As Chris said, we don't have beaver problems, we have human problems. That's a problem, not the beaver. We are the problem.
Well, I'd like to circle back to that shortly, but there's a lot of questions coming in that I think Roisin would be good at answering, and it's about genetics. So quite a few people have said how all these isolated populations of beavers, as they're not mainstream at the moment, how do we ensure that those populations are genetically viable such that they can become self-sustaining populations?
Yeah, so we've looked a bit at the genetics of various beaver populations in Britain, and we obviously examined what we brought in. So what we can see is in Scotland, the vast majority, and with other wild populations in England, the vast majority of beavers are of Bavarian descent, and we can see that quite clearly in the genetic analysis. For the Scottish reintroduction, the official reintroduction, we brought beavers in from Norway. So we obviously analysed what we brought in, and we tried to source families that are very distant from each other, not sharing exactly the same watercourse. But what we can see several generations on, that there is an okay level of genetic diversity if we look at kind of populations in Scotland and Devon and various other captive collections. But going forward, what we'd really need to do is start mixing some of these populations up. And when we say populations, it's a loose term in populations, because some of these might only involve a couple of families or extended kind of captive collections. But the main problem with what the diversity in Britain is at the minute is it's all quite related. And of course, we're an island and we can only bring in so many, or we only have brought in so many beavers. So even though they've potentially been moved about quite a lot, and there has been either partner or offspring swapping between the populations, we're going to get to a point where we're obviously going to have to bring in, you call it fresh blood, whatever term you want to use. But as I think we have to start thinking about what we have in Britain right now is the founder populations going forward. So there has to be some sort of mixing. And I know that might strike fear into some of maybe the authorities, or, you know, we're not at a point where we're discussing like wild releases, but going forward, I think we can all be grown up and see, like, beavers are out in our wider landscapes. And of course, we are bringing beavers mostly from Scotland down into captive collections. And when we trap them, you know, we try to make sure we're mixing individuals up a bit, but there's only so much genetic material in Britain currently. So we either have to be very clever and start managing it like almost like a zoo or livestock population and mixing them up a bit, or we have to look at potentially bringing in new animals in the future if we want a really healthy, genetically diverse population that, you know, if you look at starting any reintroduced population, you have to have a good mix at the start. Otherwise, you know, it's only going to inbreed in the future. So maybe that's not the conversation for right now, but if you're all accepting that beavers are back and they're in our wider landscapes, then we have to start looking at the genetic composition at some point.
I'd like to say 3 things. One is, the problem with this is, as Gerhard just pointed out, is that most of the people administrating this process don't have a brain that's as big as a trout. And therefore, the reason we can't bring them in, which we all know perfectly well, is because there's a made-up set of rules that tell us a terrible disease called Echinococcus multilocularis is going to come from continental Europe and kill us all. We know that it's 70,000 dogs, and that's what the World Health Organization tells us the problem is going to be when it comes to Britain. If you look at the import of all the things that come in great abundance to Britain, we're told we can't bring in 1 or 2 beavers because this disease is going to slay us. In reality, it's nonsense. And it comes back again to a completely artificial set of rules being made up for nature conservation for no good reason, when every other industry that involves the movement of animals can operate with free regard. So if you look at the imports of pheasants and partridge from continental Europe, so the wee things can be taken to Exmoor and have their bodies exploded by somebody with a shotgun with more or less complete impunity when it comes to quarantine. How does that work? The other day we were looking, Roisin and I, who's a civil person who will not comment on it, at the idea that we've all got to wear masks now and gloves when we're handling a beaver when it comes to COVID. Now, a beaver's kind of that shape, guys. Its breathing trajectory is down there. We're handling, what, I don't know, 8, 10, 15? Not very many of them. But their breath is there. Our breath is maybe 4 feet, 5 feet. Or if you're vertically challenged, 3 feet above them. We are breathing over them, okay? It's not hard to understand. At this point in time, as in the farming calendar, farmers are wandering around Britain, mouthing 10 million sheep a year to see whether they've got enough teeth left to make them fit for pies or breeding, okay? And what that involves is you taking your big hand and your little hand and opening their mouths, and when you peer into their mouths, they're breathing right into your face. And there's absolutely no legislation about that whatsoever. So, you know, it's just the whole thing is crazy. We need to have a grown-up look at how we're simply going to improve nature and get rid of this complete nonsense. The final thing I'd like to ask is what the other things are that Chris Jones is afraid of as a father. Does it involve laughing gas, Chris? And would you like to elaborate?
I am muting them, I'm sorry.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Derek. No idea.
I'm going to jump in here and balance the government argument. So there have been lots of questions as to what Beaver Trust is actually doing to move things forward, shall we say, and whether or not we're collaborating with other charities who are facing similar issues and have similar conversations that are equally important. So back in August, we led a collaboration of 39 NGOs who supported a letter to government to form a national beaver strategy, which is a really important step in engaging in conversation with important people like DEFRA and Natural England. And they're keen to fix an agenda. So it's a long conversation, but you know, they are listening, but that's why it's so important for us to be having these open conversations such that the you know, the science and the evidence is laid out and that people make the right choices. So I just wanted to offer a bit of balance there. And then I now want to, I think we've got half an hour left. That's gone very fast. I want to talk about Scotland. I think we ought to talk about Scotland. It was in the news last night. And I see Roisin wagging her finger at Derek. Okay. So this will be open to anyone really, but Roisin, probably you might want to answer first. How do you think populations of beavers will be affected if Scottish Natural Heritage continue to grant licences to cull them? Are beavers robust enough to maintain themselves and be largely unaffected by a low level of culling, or could it have serious impacts on their population growth?
I mean, yes, we've just basically re-established this population over a few years. So is it robust enough for culling? I think the honest answer is we don't know. And I would be verging on more cautious approach before going down the lethal control wrote. But I think we have to be practical on this. It's probably also a political decision rather than a population management decision. Obviously, there's landowners affected in prime agricultural land, which I think we can't dismiss. And there's serious consequences there. Yes, there's lots of room in Scotland for beavers, but right now we're kind of curtailed that beavers have appeared in the Tayside catchment, which is prime agricultural land, and the official release happened in a totally different part of Scotland. So I think we have to be aware that there's sensitivities, especially among the landowner community, of how beavers arose in the Scottish landscape. There's also sensitivities about, well, how much resources are available for mitigation, and we really need to get a handle on the population in Scotland and what's happening. I know a lot of figures are bandied around, but I think until we really know what's going on with the population, we can't say, can they sustain this level of culling or not? I think, and again, I'm speaking on a personal level here, I would be more relaxed about beaver culling in prime agricultural areas if beavers were allowed to expand across Scotland and in different parts where actually their benefits would be much more appreciated and where the management issues would be a lot less. So I think Scotland is a bit of a unique situation, and it rides a lot on the politics of how beavers got there. But Scotland as a whole has lots of habitat, lots of brilliant habitat where beavers could expand and exist without the levels of management and conflict issues that are seen in Tayside. And almost it's, I don't want to, because this will rile people up, but I don't say it's almost unfortunate that beavers appeared in Tayside. That was the most prime agricultural areas, where I think we'd be looking at a very different situation if beavers appeared, for example, over in Loch Lomond's area or the Cairngorms, where it's not, the waterways are not so tied to agriculture. So I think Scotland's a bit of a unique case. And I think, again, I'm going to go back, we have to take into account the experience of some landowners and the conflicts that this species can bring, and we can't dismiss that.
As the only Scottish person on this panel, I would like to say a few things. One is, those animals on the Tay were a result, which everybody forgets, prior to 2009, of political chicanery producing the wrong result. People involved in politics deciding this should not be, despite surveys which showed you had an 65% support for this. And therefore, at the end, you're left as an individual with two choices. One is you go along with the foolery, or two is you say enough. And those beavers came because sufficient number of people said enough, and it moved forward. Roisin's right. It's an unfortunate landscape. It's a landscape where you're going to have the worst of the conflicts with the beavers. But Gerhard's sitting there now. You can ask him this question next. In Scotland, the people who decide have said the population is in good nature conservation status. So there are 500, 600, 1,000, and we're going to start killing them, but not translocating them, because politically you have a minister who likes to go to the Highland show, dress in a kilt with his buddies, and drink whiskey with them in a tent in the sun. And at the end of it all, he is told the wee people who make the decisions, the decision has to be, you kill. There's maybe 1,000 animals, maybe 1,200, 1,300. In Bavaria, they're killing animals, and there's a population of 23,000. Scotland is the size of Bavaria. And not only that, but the people who are killing them in Bavaria are people who are dispassionate about it. They'd rather be having a beer on Saturday nights and not going out to kill beavers in a landscape. What we've done, again, is a British bodge. You've turned round and given the ability to people who hate to kill the subject of that hate. And history deals very badly with these things. If you're a politician, you are charged with ensuring civilized action. And this has been a complete failure of that. And people will dance around this, but that is the reality of the situation in Scotland.
I would just like to add to that. I think we are in a situation where And again, I'm not, it's not about judgment or anything like that, but I just feel there's an opportunity to translocate beavers before we are authorizing lethal control. And I think that's my kind of final line on the situation. So I empathize with some landowners that are experiencing beaver conflict issues. Of course I do. But I just feel that perhaps the automatic jump to lethal control came a little too fast. And I think there was other opportunities that could be explored. And I guess everyone will see in the recent media, there's been some kind of debate about, oh, should beavers be going to England from Scotland? I mean, of course, my gut reaction, they should be moving to other parts of Scotland. Of course there is. And there's so much other habitat that they would show such, positive, benefits in the system, but we're not there yet. And that is a political decision without doubt. So in the meantime, I would prefer that we all look at this island that we all live on, whether it's Scotland or England, that this is the bigger picture, folks, is that this is a species we want back, whether we're in Scotland or England, I don't care. The thing is, I feel there's conflicts and the political will in Scotland right now that beavers and lethal control license are issued. So let's all work together and be grown-ups. And, while beavers are accepted or, wanted in other parts of, whether it's England, Wales, whatever, let's move these and work with landowner communities and projects that want to see beavers back. Yes, okay, it might be enclosed, but to me, there's a demand and surplus that we can move about. So I'm not interested what side of the border it's on right now. And I think, to be honest, the situation in Scotland will change in the future. I honestly believe that. And we will be translocating beavers in Scotland at some point. It's just not now. So instead of beavers, perhaps being lethally controlled, let's move them to positive projects, whether that's, big organizations like National Trust, Forestry Commission. These are all really, really good projects. So I think let's see this as a positive mitigation strategy of, okay, people are experiencing conflicts and people want beavers. So let's all work together and just see, let's have this species back in our landscapes, because we know there's positive benefits, but we also know it comes with mitigation costs.
And Machine's point is very fair. We're seeing all sorts of decent organisations moving forward to say we can help. This is not about Scotland or England or Wales, where they're doing some very strange things, but it's about putting this animal that is nature's engineer of life back into the riparian environments of an island that is dying. We're the worst European nation from a biological point of view there is. I mean, the reports 2 weeks ago show how graphically stark our living circumstances are. I've worked with water voles most of my life. We're hemming these wee tiny things into tiny, tiny river corridors, and along with the dragonflies and the fish and the freshwater pearl mussels, they're just slipping through our fingers, though we've spent millions trying to conserve them. What we need is this animal back in numbers through the whole island, repairing nature day by day with every breath it takes, building life, building nature. That's it. It's not about Scotland or England or even the Welsh, though that's regrettable. It's about how we move on. They can be dead in Scotland with appalling wounds floating face down in the ditch, or we can use the animals productively in the south. It's as simple as that. There is no complication in that position.
Yeah. Nina, do you have a point?
I think the only thing that I was going to say is that it can't be forced upon people. And I think Roisin's point about being empathetic and understanding, and this being something that we move forward collaboratively, is really important. And I think also, just as a kind of shout out to Beaver Trust, that's a big part of what you're doing. It's kind of working together with these people and the communication side of this, trying to get people on board with this and understand that, this is something that we want to work together on, and not force it upon anybody, but help people to understand that this will be a benefit to the environment, to us in the long run, and is something that does need to happen, but as us working together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, we saw that when we were filming, didn't we? When we had that interaction with that couple, when Roisin and I were doing the tree painting. And there is a willingness there of people to understand more about beavers, but there is a slight skepticism as well. So there's beavers present this perfect opportunity to try and access people with information and good science and a collaborative, approachable manner, such that we might be able to tap into a receptive mind. We just don't know, but people are curious, and beavers have sparked conversation like no other animal recently. So with that in mind, this is a question to anyone who wants to take it, really, is could the reintroduction of beavers spark the reintroduction of other animals in a beaver land, in a beaver ecosystem? Could they be the start of something new? Who wants to take that? Chris? You're on mute.
Well, I think.
Gerhard, yeah.
The wider.
Okay, Chris first.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I was going to say that the wider implications of other species. I wonder which species the person asking the question was alluding to. The great thing about beavers is they are unlikely to eat your pets or your children. So that's quite a safe rewilding kind of option. As you sort of head further up the food chain, the guarantees of not being eaten are decreased. So I think there are wider sort of societal questions to ask there. But in theory, why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Duncan, then Gerhard.
Go Gerhard. He was waiting. Yeah.
Okay, I go. Well, one thing is whether you want to introduce other species like lynx or wolf or bear or whatsoever in the UK. I don't think the beaver will be a big example for the other species, but the beaver itself, it's doing a lot for the spreading of other species. If you look, for example, at the black stork we have in Germany and in other Central European countries, he's coming by himself. So we do not reintroduce black stork. He's coming and he's living in beaver territories. I think black stork has been flying from Eastern Europe over the west all the time and he couldn't see nothing. You just had the creek and the forest next to the creek. Now the beaver came, he cut the trees, he opened up the forest, he built dams. You get lots of amphibians in the dams. That's a lot of food for the stork. So it just follows the beaver and you get new species following the beaver. And you get a much, much higher biodiversity without paying any. You don't need a program, you don't need nothing, just let the beaver do the job and the other species will come. You get many more frogs, you get many more fish, you get fish otter finds places in beaver. In a beaver pond, you have more fish means better food for fish otter. And the fish otter stays in beaver dens. So you don't need a program to reintroduce fish otters. Let the beaver prepare everything, let the beaver do the job, and the rest follows by himself. All you have to do is sit down, have a beer, and watch it.
Sounds pretty good.
Or a wine if you want to have a
wine. Duncan, did you want to add anything? I also want to point out that Duncan is also Scottish.
Yes, thank you.
As well as Derek.
Maybe it's not evident in my accent, Derek, but I am Scottish. Yeah, I think, I feel I'm right in between Roisin and Derek in their approaches. On the one hand, we're all one. We're all one. There's no separation. You can't extricate any one of us or any part of the natural world and expect it to function. So in that way, we need to bring everyone along with us. Any farmers, landowners, anglers, we all need to do it together. Otherwise, it's just going to be an impossibly bumpy road. On the flip side, how long do we wait? How long do we wait while we lose species, while we lose a river's potential or a country's ecological potential for people to catch up? It's a very difficult line to draw, I find. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Wow, okay, we've got 10 minutes left. Chris, I want to come to you with a practical question about farming and beavers, or farmers and beavers. We've got a question that came in earlier that just said, how can I, as a farmer, sign up to reintroduce beavers to my farm? I've suffered flooding in February. How can I encourage the consideration of this?
I think that's clearly a problem for that farmer. Do we know who he is? Can we be in touch with him? Because that would be a really good thing to talk through it in depth. But beavers cause localized flooding. That's what they do in headwaters. And if they're doing that in places where it doesn't really matter and preventing flooding somewhere else, then that is clearly a win. We are, Beaver Trust is actively working with DEFRA and with other NGOs on getting this idea of a paid for buffer against all our watercourses. So that is going to take some of the sting out of beaver activity. But if your particular farm is getting flooded, having beavers on it might not actually fix it. But having beavers on land further up the catchment may well have a very beneficial impact for you. The other thing is, I would say, is your farming actually suitable for the environment you're in? Is the kind of farming you're doing suitable for that environment? We're told constantly that climate change is saying we're going to get wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. So I think we need to question about, how we actually manage our land. I mean, for me, it's quite easy because the land next to a stream is generally heavy clay, and it's not a big deal for me to pull back from that because it wasn't producing very much anyway. And I don't know if that's the case with you. Who knows? It would be good to sort of talk through that with some more detail from your end. But I suppose the fundamental is I can't really answer the question for you there in that particular instance. All I can say is that beavers upstream of you may well help.
Good, thank you. And just to reiterate that if you are thinking about beavers, or you think that your land is suitable for beavers, it is a good idea to get in touch with Beaver Trust, and we can see if we can help offer you some advice. So the best email is info@beavertrust.org, and then we can field your query. But I'll pop that in the chat, or maybe someone might be kind enough to. Little bit of an ecology question here. Someone said that they were worried about water warming due to slower flow in beaver ponds and a lack of shade from tree felling due to beavers. Don't know if Roisin or Gerhard or anyone would like to come back with anything there. Gerhard?
Well, we had the same discussion yesterday. If you have a smaller beaver pond in an area without any trees around it, of course the water will be warmer than on the outside, which might be not too good for some species of fish. Other species, if you look at carp, he doesn't mind if the water is 20-21 degrees. Warming up is much higher to climate change, so that's a much higher effect. If you have a bigger beaver pond with trees around it, the effect of warming is almost nothing. One problem is we have right now, there are no data on it. So we had one small collection of data in a small creek here in Bavaria in the forest, where the guy from the Fisher Society, they had a fish breeding pond further down. They're afraid that the water is too warm, and they had some nice figures. In the long run, however, the increase of the temperature was still way within the level that the fish could cope with. And the other thing was they measured the temperature of a beaver pond, but they forgot to see that above the beaver pond were a number of man-made lakes in the open area where the water was already warmed up, and then the warm water was running in the beaver pond. Of course, you get a warmer water in the beaver pond, but not due to the beaver pond, but due to the influence of the warmer water coming in. But there, so far, I don't have any real data on how much beaver pond will increase water temperature. They did it for millions of years, so why care too much?
Roisin?
No,
It's not me.
Sophie's.
Derek?
Well, Alan just told us it's just basically increased diversity. I've been swimming in beaver ponds on my farm, and the last time I went swimming with my kids, there are all these kind of like blobs of something. It's absolutely breathtakingly cold when you go in June, July. And then there are these blobs of things like floating green algae. And as you go past them in your kayak, you look at them and think, what on earth is that? And you pick it up and run your fingers through it, and you think, oh, that's interesting. It's beaver shit with a lot of sort of like blanket weed growing out of it. And you turn around the kids and say, look, kids, whatever you're going to do now, just keep on swimming, but make sure you keep your mouth shut. And in case anybody's wondering, Roisin and I have worked together for years. We painted her nails. You know that really acrid stuff that they put on for children to stop them biting them. We painted her nails when you weren't looking about 15 minutes ago, and now they're right down to the quick and they're bleeding. What should we do, Sophie?
Stress.
Well, that's interesting. That's nice. Okay, so
Sorry, Sophie.
we have no. Don't apologise. This
Yeah,
this
I think
chat is open for all. We have one.
That's
We
very
have one.
handled, Sophie. Well done, you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got one big question to round off, and this is for any takers. What is the one thing we can do to unlock the barriers to progress with restoring our rivers and wildlife with beavers? If we had to do one thing, what would it be? Maybe if go around the room, what would your one thing be to unlock the barriers? Chris, how about we start with you?
I would, if I were Boris for a day, go around to the Environment Agency and say, right, I want 0.5% of your flood budget for the next 10 years and spend that on beaver reintroduction. It would do the job.
Cool, thank you. Nina, what would you do as a communicator extraordinaire?
I think it would just be making sure that the right person saw this. And we were saying today, Chris and I were interviewed by ITV, and they were asking us, you know, what would George Eustace say? Like, he just needs to come to the beaver pond, see what they've done, and then basically, you know, the right people seeing the positive benefits and then making the right movements in government, basically.
Okay, and Gerhard, what would be your one thing?
Well, one thing, it wouldn't cost a single cent extra. We pay the farmer subsidies, 3 billion a year in Bavaria, and 1 billion is paid for garbage production. So a third of all production by farmers is thrown away. It's not a problem of the farm, it's a problem of us. It's too old, it's not big enough, it's too small, it's complete nonsense. Just say to the farmers, okay, we want to have 20 meters to the right and the left of the creek, no farming, no grassland, no nothing. You get the subsidies and you leave it. And you make more money than with producing corn. You get 1,800 euros for a hectare corn, but you spend 2,000 euro to produce the corn. So you waste 150, 200 euro of your subsidies to produce the corn. You are an entrepreneur, you say yes or no. If you say yes, you get the subsidies for the whole farm. If you say no, it's your decision, you don't get the money. And all of a sudden, we have 20 meter strips along every creek. We don't spend a single extra euro, and the farmers get the same money. And maybe we have then only 29% of 33% of garbage production. Don't tell it to the farmer union, or you're going to get the sign on it.
Good. Duncan, what would be your one thing?
I think find someone that doesn't like beaver for whatever reason it is, and take them on a walk and show them sites where, you know, the abundance of wildlife speaks for itself. That can change hearts and minds, and that's really the battle at the end of the day. Seeing it for yourself, as Nina said, that makes all the difference.
It really, really does. And finally, Derek and Roisin, one thing, please.
Derek, your one thing?
No, you haven't muted us yet.
We're not muted.
We're arguing about it.
Yeah,
Right,
we
you
are.
go first.
I think it's a matter of resources. I mean, we want to see this species back, but let's not be about the bush. It's going to have some costs to it. So yeah, the government needs to take it seriously to get the benefits of beavers and all the things we all know and appreciate. It will take some costs. So I think it's about resources. I mean, a personal add-on, if that's okay, free up the translocation process. Beavers, unfortunately, are being shot in some areas, and I personally feel that's a waste of an animal. And they, right now, at this point in time, they could be moved to better areas. Over to Derek.
Well, Roisin kicked me really hard when it began. So I can't go for random executions or even actually start to look through the list of people that shouldn't be making any decisions in this. That's apparently not an option that's reasonable. So what we need something that's free-flowing. We need people who look at a problem and having looked at that problem, start to solve it, not make more issues that are difficult and petty and pointless. There is a quote, Richard, my able assistant on the other side of the room was looking for it, but hey, we can't find it at the time we've got. Which is that if you're looking to do an impossible task, what you do is you give that impossible task to the young because they have never been told it can't be done. There are too many old duffers sitting in positions of responsibility which they are ill-fitted to. If we want to move on to the brave new world we urgently need to move on to, then we need more young people involved in this, and we need a lot of the old shit of the past just to be swept away. And that's not a swear word.
Good.
Correct.
So that's very good. And it seems like there's a need for leadership. Perhaps, and a spread across generations. Because yes, no, very good. Right, time.
What about you, Sophie? What's your one thing?
Oh, my one thing I think it's communicate better. I think all of us need to communicate better. We need to talk to each other more, and there's too many people following their own agendas, and we need to, there's power in collaboration, and people like saying that, but it's one thing saying it, but another thing actually doing it.
Yeah.
So
stop looking through the letterbox and open the door.
Exactly. Good. Wow. Thank you so much, everybody. We're slightly over time, but I hope you'll agree that was a really exciting, stimulating chat. Thank you so much for being a part of it. This event has been recorded and it will be uploaded to Chelsea Green's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch it again, share it with people who you think might like to see it. And let's keep this conversation going. You can follow us on Chelsea Green on social media. We're in the early stages of developing more webinars like this because we think that there's a lot of conversation clearly looking at this chat that we need to keep having. So please keep your eyes peeled for those. And if you have any questions, read this. I cannot recommend it enough. Any bookshop, but support your local indie. It will answer a lot of your questions and enlighten and inspire you and make you laugh, which is always a good thing at the moment. So thank you so much for joining and have a lovely evening, and we're going to let you crack on and see you all very soon. Thank you all very much for being here.